Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to Miss HAZI and my fellow friends. Today our group will present about the culture diversity, and then the country that we choose is the New Zealand. My name is Muhammad Fikrulfiqih bin Mohamad Fadzli, and then my fellow friends are Brother Fuzail, Sister Adlynna and Sister Najwa will present on the details of the New Zealand. So as you can see, right here is the New Zealand flag. Did you know that New Zealand have another name beside New Zealand, which is Aotearoa? It is the indigenous language in the New Zealand. So, and then next, the capital city of New Zealand is Wellington, and the largest city in the New Zealand is Auckland. Moving on to the history of the New Zealand. According to the Maori legend, New Zealand was fished from the sea by the demigod Maui. So, who is Maui? Can you guess? According to the Maori and the Polynesian myth and legends, Maui was gifted an incredible demigod. He was bold and taught useful art to mankind. He tamed the sun and bring the fire to the world. But the famous feat was the creation of the island that now today is New Zealand. In the 1642, Dutch explorer named Albert Tasman became the first European that see New Zealand. In 1840, representative from the UK and Maori chief signed the Treaty of Wellington, and then the result of it is the British declared sovereignty over the island in the 1841. New Zealand became the colony in British Empire. This is the reason why New Zealand flag have the symbol of the Union Jack, because they became the colony of the British, and then in the 1947 New Zealand gained their independence. Moving on to the map of the New Zealand. New Zealand is an island country in the southwestern Pacific Ocean. It is conceived two main land masses, which are the North Island and the South Island. As you can see in the map, the top one is North Island, and it also have another name, which is Te Ika Amoy, and the bottom one is the South Island that names Te Waiponamu. So this is the interesting fact in New Zealand. The number one sport in New Zealand is rugby, not like any other country, which is football. They are famous for the names Black Hawk. They have trademark, which is Haka dance that they perform before the games. Next is the population. Although New Zealand is developed country, it only have 5 million population in the 2019, and then most of it is European, and then following by the indigenous people, Asian and Islander. And also they are famous for the nature scenery that is beautiful in their country. So this is the example of the nature attraction in the New Zealand. I think that's all from me. I will pass to the brother Fuzail to continue. Thank you.
Now I will talk about community background of New Zealand and the culture. Contemporary New Zealand has a majority of people of European origin, a significant minority of Maori, and smaller numbers of people from Pacific Islands and Asia. In the early 21st century, Asians were the fastest growing demographic group. New Zealand was one of the last sizable land areas suitable for habitation to be populated by human beings. The first settlers were Polynesians who travelled from somewhere in eastern Polynesia, possibly from what is now French Polynesia. They remained isolated in New Zealand until the arrival of European explorers, the first of whom was the Dutch navigator Abel Jensen Tasman in 1642. Demographers estimate that by the time British naval Captain James Cook visited the country in 1769, the Maori population was not much greater than 100,000. They had no name for themselves but eventually adopted the name Maori, meaning normal, to distinguish themselves from the Europeans who after Cook's voyage began to arrive with greater frequency. The Europeans brought with them an array of diseases to which the Maori had no resistance, and the Maori population declined rapidly. Their reduction in numbers was exacerbated by widespread interbattle warfare once the Maori had acquired firearms, and by warfare with Europeans. By 1896, only about 42,000 Maori, a small fraction of New Zealand's total population at the time, remained. Early in the 20th century, however, the numbers began to increase as they acquired resistance to such disease as measles and influenza, and as their birth rate subsequently recovered. By the early 21st century, Maori constitute about 1/6 of New Zealand's population, and that proportion was expected to increase. Europeans began to settle in New Zealand in the 1820s. They arrived in increasing numbers after the country was annexed by the Great Britain following the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840. By the late of 1850s, settlers outnumbered Maori, and in 90 there were some 772,000 Europeans, most of whom were New Zealand born. Although the overwhelming majority of immigrants were of British extractions, other Europeans came as well, notably from Scandinavia, Germany, Greece, Italy, and the Balkans. Groups of Central Europeans come between World War I and II, and a large body of Dutch immigrants arrived after World War II. Since the 1950s, there has been a growing community of Pacific Island people from Samoa, formerly Western Samoa, the Cook Islands, New Tokelau. Although Chinese and Indian immigrants have long settled in New Zealand since the 1990s, there has been a large growth in immigration from Asia. Next, I will continue with religions in New Zealand. New Zealand is normally Christian, with Anglican, Roman Catholic, and Presbyterian denominations being the largest. Other Protestant sections and Maori adaptations of Christianity, which are the Ratana and Rigatu Church, constitute the remainder of the Christian population. About 1/3 of the population does not claim any religious affiliation. Hinduism, Buddhism, and Sikhism have small but growing numbers of adherents. There is no established official religion, but Anglican cathedrals are generally used for state occasions. For the settlement patterns of New Zealand, the majority of New Zealanders live in the North Island. The New Zealand countryside is thinly populated, but there are many small towns with populations of up to 10,000 and a number of provincial cities of more than 20,000. Some of the smallest towns and villages have become deserted as people move to the bigger towns and cities. The main urban areas are Auckland in the north of the North Island, the main industrial complex and commercial centre Hamilton, the centre of Waikato farming region, Wellington, centrally located at the southern tip of the North Island, and the political capital, Christchurch, in the middle of the South Island and the second largest industrial area. And finally, still farther south, Dunedin. Although New Zealand is notable for the strength of its rural sector, the great majority of people live in cities. There is also a marked difference in the degree of population growth of the two main islands. the North having about 3/4 of the total population, in sharp contrast to the earlier years of systematic settlement. As in the past, the great majority of Maori lived in the North Island after World War II. However, most Maori became urban dwellers, as did migrants from the Pacific Islands. For cultural life, New Zealand's cultural influence are predominantly European and Maori. Immigrant groups have generally tended to assimilate into the European lifestyle, although traditional customs are still followed by many Tongans, Samoans, and other Pacific peoples. Maori culture suffered greatly in the years of colonization and into the 20th century, and many Maori were torn between the pressure to assimilate and the desire to preserve their own culture. However, since the 1950s, there has been a cultural renaissance with a determined effort to preserve and revive artistic social traditions. The culture of the Pakeha, the daily life and social customs of New Zealanders, the Maori culture has seen a renaissance in wood carving and weaving, and in the construction of carved and decorated meeting house, which are war wakairo. Maori waita songs and dances have become increasingly popular, especially among the young. Maori meetings, whether hui assemblies or tangi funeral gatherings, are conducted in traditional fashion with ancient greeting ceremonies strictly observed. Waves of migrants have also brought different cultures that are celebrated in various ways. For example, in annual festivals such as the Chinese Lantern Festival and Lunar New Year, and the Indian festival Diwali. Every country has their traditional food. Same as New Zealand cuisine has also been influenced by the food of immigrants and the expectation of international tourists. It was originally a combination of traditional British dishes with local delicacies. Fresh seafood was popular along the coast. Mutton, venison, and meat pies were common. Pavlova, a sweet marine dish, was and remains a popular dessert. Food, however, has become more imaginative and cosmopolitan, and there are many restaurants, bistros, and cafes in the major cities and towns that present a range of classic and ethnic menus. A traditional Maori meal is hangi, a feast of meat, seafood, and vegetables steamed for hours in an earthen oven. Umu. I will pass to the next presenter.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Adlynna binti Mat Adnan. My matrix number is 1812368. Before that, I want to thank you, Brother Fuzail, for presenting. So now I'm going to present on language in New Zealand. Okay, there is two official languages of New Zealand, which is one is Maori, and one is New Zealand Sign Language. For official languages, though not many Kiwis, or we call New Zealand peoples, speak either one of the official language. There are roughly 600,000 ethnic Maori in the country, but only 100,000 who can understand the Maori ethnic language, and 30,000 to 50,000 speakers of the language over 15 years old. Okay, and also Maori is the standard dialect of what was once a highly regionalized group of dialects, and it was granted legal status via the Maori Languages Act of 1987. this was not the first time Maori was promised protections, but perhaps the first time it stuck. And in the 1840, for your information, in the 1840 Treaty of Waitangi, Queen Victoria promised to protect Maori languages, but it went on to be discouraged in schools and even punished in some cases. And then today it's the Maori language is spoken in schools and in the media also. And the interesting part is New Zealand also have a sign language which has about 2,000 speakers in the New Zealand country itself, and it was recognized as an official languages as of 2006. As a matter of fact, New Zealand was the first country to grant official status to sign languages. And that's all from me. I will pass the floor to Sister Farah. Thank you. Assalamualaikum.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Farah Najwa binti Sarifuddin, metric number 1713116. And now I will present about the issue and challenges of the Maori. So as explained by my friends in the previous slide, the Maori are a Polynesian people that live across all of New Zealand. They arrived from the Eastern Polynesian in 1350. So New Zealand was first settled by Europeans in the middle of 17th century. The biggest threat to the Maori is cultural and linguistic extinctions. The government didn't have Maori culture until the late 1900. Although the Maori were given the right to vote from the early 1850s, they could not vote based on laws on land ownership, and the fact that a Maori could not vote without a title from the crown. So in the first general elections, only 100 Maori can vote. White New Zealanders welcomed this discrimination because they did not believe that the Maori were civilized enough to vote. On average, the Maori have less access to clean water than the white New Zealander, and many rural Maori suffer from resource exploitations. Until the 1980s, the government gave no aid to the preservation of the Maori language, and the language would have gone extinct if it not had been to the resilience of the Maori people. The Maori suffers from immense poverty. The Maori are the poorest ethnic group in New Zealand. They are mostly in the lowest percentile for healthcare and education. The poverty rates of the Maori are around double of the European New Zealanders. So Maori make up most of the New Zealand prison populations, and their rates of incarcerations and criminality are very high. Next, racism and other social issues are bad for Maori pride. So the Maori suffer a lot from racism, from people on the street, hiring prejudice. So many European New Zealanders appropriate Maori culture such as the haka or Maori facial tattoos. This is so much of a problem that in 2000, the Ngati Toa tribe threatened to trademark the haka. Other than that, environmental issues threaten to hurt Maori civilizations. So many Maori villages lies on the coast, and sea level rise even a few meters will be threatened to completely wipe out the settlements. Pollution of rivers such as the River Waikato and other natural resources impact on the Maori ability to live their traditional way of life, forcing them to move from their homes into towns or cities. So these are the solutions that might be effective to overcome the issues and challenges of the Maori. So schools in New Zealand could help to combat racism by educating everyone about Maori culture and history. So educating people is often a viable solution for racism. Next, starting government-funded immersion courses for Te Reo Maori and improving the place of the language in schools. This will help the preservation of the Maori language as well as promoting the culture. Then the scholarship for poor Maori groups, it will be great for the Maori people, as it is the opportunity for them to break out of poverty. So it may be difficult to implement these reforms because of how much taxpayer money would be needed to make changes to the school system, make all new courses and to pay for the scholarships. There may also be social backlash to changes in the school system due to the fact that the Te Reo Maori would likely to have replaced another subject. In such a rich country as New Zealand, the public should be willing to make little sacrifices, such as higher taxes, to help their culture and the historic culture of the Maori. To conclude, the Maori suffer from many issues including racism, pollution, and poverty. So education is the way to solve this issue. Unfortunately, because they are so far integrated into European New Zealand culture that there is no way for them to go back to their way of life. So helping preserve their culture is the next best thing. As more countries develop, many more indigenous tribes will become integrated, and the solution used in New Zealand could be used to help preserve their culture as well. That's all from us. Thank you.
In conclusion, New Zealand offers us many interesting culture in terms of their arts, their language, and their dance. And then in 2019, they recorded about 4 million tourists that come to their country. So to New Zealand have a lot of the product that can attract tourists to come to their countries. I think that's all from us. Thank you for your time and thank you for listening. Bye bye. Assalamualaikum.
And now the All Blacks just waiting for the French to peel off the tracksuits, stand in front of them and receive the challenge of the haka. challenge has been received by the French. Stand by, the Rugby World Cup final.